guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite books of 2019. I have very much been looking forward to making this video. I think this is my second favorite end of the year, beginning of the year video. My first favorite is the one I'm going to film next. That will be posted next week, so look forward to that. But I have 10 books, as I said, my top 10 favorite books of 2019, so let's just get into them. I will be talking about these in the order I read them, so they're not necessarily least favorite to favorite or vice versa, but I will mention I do have top 3 favorites. I guess I'll say top 4 because even those top 4 aren't, I don't really have a specific order for those top 4, but they're just my top 4 for the year, so I'll mention which ones those are. Anyway, let's just get into this. So the first book I read this year, the very first book I read this year, was my first favorite for the year, and that was Queens of Fennbirn by Kendare Blake, which is a novella bind-up for the Three Dark Crowns series by Kendare Blake. This series follows an island where on every generation the queen gives birth to triplets, each with different powers, and once those triplets are born, the old queen leaves the island. The triplets grow up, they are raised separately, able to learn more about their powers, and when they reach the age of 16, they basically fight to the death, and the last one standing becomes the next queen. So the whole series follows 3 specific queens who are battling for the crown, but this novella bind-up, there's 2 novellas in here, and the first one follows the girls as children, and while I liked that one, it wasn't necessarily super interesting to me. That being said, the second novella follows a queen that lived nearly 800 years before the events of Three Dark Crowns, who is a very infamous queen. It just tells her story, and I absolutely loved it. Honestly, it has stuck with me more than the rest of the series has, which is a little sad, but really I love this series because of the world and the history of this world. I just find it fascinating. I don't know why, I just love it so much. I'm not really connected to the characters that much, or even the plot as far as what exactly is going on. I do like it how it connects to the history of the world, but other than that, I just love the politics and the history. So reading this story about this queen that lived 800 years ago and what really happened in this infamous story was just amazing, and it's just really stuck with me. I actually only had 9 originally books that I wanted to talk about, but I really wanted to get to a top 10, so I was like, what would be my 10th one? And I was like, you know, this really has stuck with me, and I really actually liked it a lot. Even though it was just a short little novella, I just adored it. So the next one I actually read 2 books by this author this year, and both of them were kind of battling, but I didn't want multiple books by a single author on this list, and so I ended up deciding to just go with this one I think I liked slightly more, and that is Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. I also recently read Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys, and again, really liked it. I think this one just had a little more action in it. There was just more like, you know, bombs dropping and things like that in this one, which made it a little more engaging. I also liked the multiple perspectives in this one. There were things I liked about only having one perspective in Between Shades of Grey for sure, but I did really enjoy the multiple perspectives in this. If you don't know, this basically follows a group of people who are involved in Operation Hannibal, which was where towards the end of the war, when the Russians were starting to come into Eastern Germany, all the Nazis were telling the people in Eastern Germany to get over to the west side of Germany to protect themselves, and so they had to get these ships to take people over, and it was this huge mess trying to get these people out. So it's a group of people who are on one of these ships that is leaving, and it ends up being one of the largest maritime disasters in history. Actually, the largest, I believe, as far as loss of life. Almost 10,000 people were killed, and about 5,000 of those were children. Very sad, and a part of history that we don't necessarily hear about, which I understand why. For example, we hear more about the Titanic than this, just because the Titanic wasn't during a time of war. It was a whole bunch of civilians. It was supposed to be unsinkable. Like, it was all these things that added up to make it this big deal, whereas this, first of all, it was during a time of war. So, you know, ship sinking was a common occurrence during war. It was also the Germans, which unfortunately means that people weren't paying as much attention to that. Unfortunately, the Germans were the enemy, so obviously their history isn't as, especially during this time, isn't as well taught, so I understand why it's not as well known as the Titanic because of just the different circumstances, but I think it is really important to recognize the losses that these people faced and remember that no matter what the circumstances, if someone's dying, someone's hurting about it, if that makes sense. And so I really, really like this story, and I definitely recommend it if you're interested in it. Next, I read Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which I absolutely loved. This is a retelling of a Polish fairy tale. It's kind of like Beauty and the Beast, but a little bit different. There's a valley that's surrounded by this wood that's very dangerous. People either don't come out of it at all, or if they do, they are changed in a very strange and scary way. There's this wizard who protects this valley and the people in it from the wood, but in return he asks for every 10 years a woman from one of the villages to come and serve him. And of course many people assume that he's having sex with them, but once they come out after those 10 years, they always say, no, he never touched us, and they always end up wanting to leave the valley. They always end up leaving. There's this girl, Agnieszka, I believe this is how you say her name, who her friend Kasia, I'm not really sure how to say it. Everybody has always assumed that she would be the one the wizard would take because he always seems to take the most talented, the most beautiful girls, and that's definitely Kasia. And so Agnieszka kind of has always known this was going to happen, but of course something occurs and the wizard ends up picking Agnieszka. Things go on from there. It's a wonderful story. The setting is amazing. This is another one that the history plays a big role in the plot, which, as I've mentioned with Three Dark Crowns, I really, really enjoy. So I really liked it. I liked Agnieszka as a character. She was actually on one of my favorite characters of the year list, and I thought the forest was very interesting. My only complaint with it ended up being the romance I wasn't a huge fan of. I kind of liked how the book ended with where the romance was going, but I didn't really like it throughout. I just felt like it was kind of needless, to say the least. I almost feel like it would have been sweet if they had been friends and maybe by the end they started having more of like a romantic chemistry, and then the ending happened that way where it hints at like, yeah, they're going to continue a relationship, but I feel like almost like a friendship would have been sweeter, personally. But other than that, I really, really did enjoy this. Next, I have a book, my favorite book this year from Kristin Hannah. I had read 3 books by Kristin Hannah and really liked all of them, and so I was like, I definitely want to pick one of hers that I feel like I liked the best, and that has to be The Nightingale, which is probably her most popular. This follows 2 sisters during World War II as the Nazis take over France. And one of the sisters has a family, she has a child, and she really just wants to keep them alive, whatever the cost for herself. Whereas the other sister is single and she's kind of a wildfire, and so she goes out and takes a greater part in the rebellion that's going on in France. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. The characters are amazing. I love Kristin Hannah's writing. It's not necessarily beautiful, but it has a very engaging sense to it. She knows how to keep the plot moving in a way that keeps me engaged, and writes in a way that I'm able to connect with the characters really well without being flowery, without being overly dramatic with her writing. It's just very engaging, and I just really enjoy it a lot, and I'm excited to continue reading her books because she has a lot of them. Next, I have my first classic, favorite classic for the year, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is a domestic psychological thriller following an unnamed narrator who ends up falling in love with this man. She marries him and is whisked off to his grand mansion. However, when she gets there, she discovers that a lot of the people in this house and around it are kind of obsessed with this man's previous wife, who was named Rebecca, hence the name of the book. And she, as a character, ends up developing this strange need to just know everything about Rebecca, and there was some mystery surrounding her death, and it's just a really fun story and really dark and creepy, and there was one part that was like really heartbreakingly terrifying. in my opinion, and with the housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, who particularly doesn't seem to like this new Miss De Winter, as she is now called now that she's married. Maxim, I believe, is the man's name. Yeah. Very interesting book, and I really want to read more by Daphne du Maurier soon. Next, I have my favorite Thomas Hardy for the year. I read 3 Thomas Hardys this year and really enjoyed pretty much all of them. There was one I didn't like quite as much, but then the other 2 I really liked, and this one definitely was my favorite, and that is The Hand of Ethelberta by Thomas Hardy. I adored this story. Really, I loved it because of Ethelberta, to be honest, which I talk a lot about her character in my favorite characters of 2019, so I won't go too much into it here. But she's just fascinating, getting to know her and watching her development, and I loved the ending of this book. Not because it was a happy ending necessarily, it wasn't like a horrible sad ending either though, and I could see people not really loving this ending, but I feel like it was just right for Ethelberta, for the other characters. I loved looking at the class dynamics. If you don't know, this story follows Ethelberta. Before the beginning of the book, she married a wealthy gentleman, and he ended up dying not long into their marriage. Her mother-in-law ends up saying, "I will take care of you, I will accept you into my family, but you can't see your family ever again," because her family comes from below stairs. Her father's a butler, her brothers are carpenters, so she basically makes a promise to not really have any communication with her family. She does, however, sneak some time in with her sister and things like that, but she ends up writing a book of poetry, I want to say, and wants to become a storyteller. Things kind of take off from there. There's quite the love shape in here. I think there's a total of 4 men in this. If love shapes scare you away, don't let them scare you away with Thomas Hardy, because he does them very, very well, especially for the time period. It's not so much like, I love them both, then I don't know which one I want. It's more about the class and what she wants out of life, and I love it so much. Next, I have my favorite of the Sandersons I read this year, and I ended up going with, I considered going with Oathbringer, which is the 3rd book in the Stormlight Archive. However, I had to go with Warbreaker. It's interesting because I definitely think Oathbringer is a better written book. The world is a lot more well developed, especially because that's part of a series full of huge books, and this one's just a standalone as of right now. I believe he's planning to make a sequel to this at some point, but he hasn't yet. And this one just really stuck with me. I don't know, I think the world's very interesting. I really liked the characters. I liked the religious dynamics involved, and I thought the magic system in this was extra cool. And I think Oathbringer, the magic system in that, I am still struggling to completely understand. Whereas this, I feel like I was able to grasp pretty easily, and I liked it a lot, and I'm really excited for him to make a sequel. Okay, oh, I forgot to mention, Hand of Ethelberta is in my top 4, those top 4 I mentioned, and then these last 3 are the other 3 in that top 4. So, the first one is the largest book I've ever read in my whole life, and that is Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. I love this story so much. I loved Victor Hugo's writing. He has this sarcasm that I just love so much. It made me laugh. I love getting the way he is able to get into the histories of every single character, even some of the side characters that are there for 2 seconds. I could see that bothering some people, but I feel like because I already knew the story from the musical, it was easy for me to appreciate getting to know these characters that I had seen but didn't know much about. So I actually would say, if you want to read this, definitely see if you can see either the musical live or at least watch the movie adaptation, just because I think it's easier to deal with the length of this and all the details if you know at least a little bit about the story. The musical definitely has a lot of differences to the book, but it's similar enough that you're able to see that arc of the plot and understand what's happening and what to expect, to where you can appreciate the extra details you're getting, if that makes sense. So I just adored this so much. It has some amazing characters in it, and I really liked Victor Hugo's writing, so it just made it even more enjoyable. Almost done. Next we have The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Brontë. I absolutely love this book, like, so much. I love Helen Graham as a character. That's really what held it up for me the most. I did appreciate Anne Bronte's writing style. I feel like a lot of people love Emily Bronte, her writing style, which I understand because she has beautiful writing for sure. She was a poet, so it would make sense. But Anne Bronte, I feel like, has a very simplistic writing style without being too simple that it's awkward or choppy or anything, but she just tells a story, and it's just beautiful. I love the plot in here. I found that this book, and I feel like Agnes Grey will do this too, both give a little glimpse into Anne Bronte's innermost thoughts and feelings about her family and her state in life. I feel like Emily Bronte set up Wuthering Heights to make a beautiful story, and that she was inspired by life events for sure, but it was more about getting the story on this page. I feel like Charlotte Bronte, I've only read Jane Eyre by her, but I feel like for her, it was also just a story, fun to tell a story that she loves. But I feel like Anne really wrote herself into these stories and really wrote her experiences, and I love it so much. You can see the emotion that was put into it and the experience Anne put into it, and I just really, really appreciate and loved it. And it has definitely honestly replaced Wuthering Heights on my list of favorite classics of all time. And the last book on this list is one that I absolutely adore. Definitely, if you couldn't tell, the other three of my top 4 were all classics, but this last one that is also in my top 4 is the only modern novel of those top, and that is The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This is a story following an author named Vida Winter, who is a very interesting woman. She has never really told the truth about her life. She's kind of an enigma. She has written many, many well-acclaimed novels. She's been interviewed many, many times about her life, but every time she tells a different story, and it's kind of become this thing with her. But she is reaching the end of her life, she's getting old, and she decides she wants to tell her story. So she contacts this woman who she's never met before, this girl Margaret, who owns a bookstore with her father and has written a couple little short things before, but not much. She is invited to tell Vida Winter's story, and so she goes, and we are able to discover Vida's story as well as Margaret's story and her own life struggles, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful story. If you love Victorian Gothic fiction, you'll love this. The atmosphere is very much like Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, Rebecca, The Woman in White, all those kinds of Gothic stories. Very much inspired this. I love Diane Setterfield's writing. I felt like it was beautiful, and I recently picked up a more recent release by her, Once Upon a River, which I am so excited to pick up because of how much I loved The 13th Tale. So definitely recommend this if you're interested. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. Okay, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below some of your favorite books you read this year, as I would love to know, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!